adore thee with honor. Not on thee,
The Europeans came to this country in the 1600s, and they began to populate our country and to take over our country, to kill the natives of this country, especially those along the eastern seaboard. A lot of those tribes were decimated after the Europeans came. The Kituwas, being farther inland, did not suffer so much from the decimation as some of the ones that were on the very eastern coast. By 1690, the Kituwas were just in daily contact with Europeans. And they began to take on some of the European ways, to dress the way the Europeans did, to take on the agriculture and the cultural ways, and for intermarriage. So when that happened, there were a lot of the ones who wanted to follow the European ways and to follow all the things that had been brought from across the waters. And then there were those who did not want to participate in that society. They wanted to remain as they had always been, just hunting and gathering and providing for their families in the way that they had traditionally been accustomed to doing. And so, that being the case, there was a division that happened. In 1809, both of those groups went to Washington, and they asked for a division line at the Hiwassee River for the upper towns and the lower towns. The upper towns being the towns that were more progressive, and the lower towns being the towns that were more traditional. Wouldn't be long before they would again be inundated by Europeans. And so they said, okay, we don't want to have to move again right away, so we'd like to have land west of the Mississippi, and maybe that way we can maintain longer. We'll be able to practice our own ways and not be influenced so much by the Europeans. And of course the government at that time, and from the time they got here, they wanted to get rid of the Indians. So they said, yeah, sure, you can do that. And so they sent out a search party into the Arkansas Territory in 1809 to find a reservation for the people. And they did find a reservation. There were already some living there. At the end of the Cherokee Wars in the 1790s, many of the traditional people moved west of the Mississippi, and King Diwali, or Chief Diwali, was one of them. He and his people had moved into northeastern Arkansas along that Arkansas-Missouri border where St. Francis River comes down. It's been estimated that probably around 2,000 traditionals were already living there when they came in to find a place in 1809. Then in 1817, the traditionals who were at the time of the treaty in 1817, where they got the reservation in Arkansas, they were known as the Western Cherokees. They were not known as Kituwas, although they called themselves Kituwas. They were not known as Kituwas by the government, so they were called Western Cherokees. And they obtained a reservation by giving up some of the land in the east and moving west into Arkansas Territory. In 1825, there began to be so many whites invading into the territory, and of course the traditionalists had been told that white people would not be allowed to invade into their territory, and that was pretty much common. Every treaty said that, and it never worked, not ever. And so by that time there were conflicts and so forth with the white people who were invading into their reservation. And so there became a push by the federal government and by the Arkansas Territory to rid themselves of the Kituwas or the Western Cherokees who were there in that land. And so in 1828 then they were moved on into Indian Territory. And by that time, John Q. Adams was the President of the United States, and he told them that if they did not move on into Indian Territory, that the U.S. would take their property and that they would have nothing. And so it wasn't just like they wanted to move. They did not want to move, but they did want to keep a land mass that they could call their own, they could call their home. And so they did sign the Treaty of 1828. It was only the Western Cherokees or the Catawbas who signed that treaty to come on into Indian Territory, and that time were given all the territory that became known as the Cherokee Nation, plus the Cherokee Strip that went all the way out to the end of the United States. At that time, the United States come to an end. The border was right at the end of Oklahoma without the Panhandle. So that's what they gained during that time.